Okay, so good day, class. So today we're going to discuss the principles of community development. So uh, our lesson, we're going to take it from one of my writings for my Doctor of Technology education subjects. So what is the essence of community development? So the term community work, social development, and community development are used interchangeably in the field of social work. But I believe that the current practice of social work is related to community development, but both are totally different endeavors. As an architect, I view community development in the lens of public infrastructure that benefits the community. I believe what this country needs are well-made public infrastructure to support economic development such as roads, schools, libraries, science centers, museums, hospitals, railway stations, airports, etc. So if these things are addressed, then a lot of social issues in the community will be addressed and changed. So the concept of community development or growth is essential for both urban and public economics. So according to Barsignan and Coates Research, a study 2021, the establishment of infrastructure such as housing and local public goods such as schools, public protection, bridges, libraries, museums, and other types of institutional structures is one of the requirements for growth. The authors emphasize the importance of community growth and the role of public wealth accumulation. So, development can take on many different definitions since it includes a wide range of topics such as infrastructure, research, energy, and the environment. So, as an architect, I have a better understanding of infrastructure growth. So, there's a clear correlation between infrastructure development and a country's wealth. So, the majority of developed countries have considerably better physical infrastructure than developing countries like the Philippines and other emerging economies of the 21st century. So the tenets of mutual respect, equity, and justice are the core of community growth or development. It also has an effect on the direction of critical private and public functions like policy, planning, education, healthcare, social service responses, housing, and education. The fundamental essence of community service in the educational sector provides students with the ability to leave a positive impression on our society and promote a spirit of volunteerism while also gaining awareness and critical life skills. So, what is the definition of principle? So, a principle is defined as a value or preposition that which serves as a guide for evaluation or behavior. In the field of law, it is a rule that needs to be followed or complied to prevent a consequence of an action to happen. A principle could also be a set of values that is established by a group of people or a community. It could also be a truth that is fundamental, such as law, doctrine, or force of motivation. So, every method, theory, or concept has basic fundamentals that define its nature. These facets or components are known as principles, which act as key identifiers in defining a concept to its simplest form or state. They have similarities to that of the materials for construction of a building or infrastructure. So they are like building blocks that have individual functions in the grand scheme of the building design. An in-depth analysis of these principles could provide deep insights into concepts that are being studied. So, based on the essence of community development and the definition of principle, what should be the principles of community development? So if we correlate the definition of principle and the essence of community development, then the following principles for community development should be construed. First is empowerment. So looking at a psychological standpoint, human beings have a tendency to do things they are motivated to do with a feeling that they have some level of control over their actions. Empowerment acts as a societal motivator that has a great deal of importance in community development. Community members that are empowered take genuine actions to solve their problems. As a key principle of community development, empowerment allows for the prompt action towards problems or issues. So it is a powerful motivator because of the personal involvement of different community members. Next is appearance and character. So the principle of appearance and character are important components in community development because they set the vibe or feeling about their place, group, or ideals. A particular community can be related with either a positive or negative undertone of which their members set their identity into. So in more progressive and developed nations, the architectural character of a particular community sets the ambience of a place or community. In tribal communities, it means preserving the culture and character of their heritage and architecture. Then we also have diversity and inclusion. So the development of a community should include all its members, regardless of their ethnic identity, beliefs, gender, and political affiliation. Since the world we live in is a diverse place, it will not be uncommon for communities to have a healthy level of diversity, even when the group as a whole has a common interest or focus. So the calls for communities to address issues that affect not only the majority of the populace, but the minority as well. Then we have preparation and planning. There is a need for planning and preparation in communities because the process of community development could get complicated. It is important for communities to prepare and plan for the future, including the detailed planning on how to address a particular conundrum or problem. So the main instigators of community development need to have a bird's eye view on the direction they will face and the different processes and strategies involved in the enforcement of plans. Then you have participation and collaboration. Community development work needs the cooperation of all the stakeholders, including the government sector, for programs to work and be implemented. So since community development is an endeavor that couldn't be done in an individual level alone, there's a need for collaboration in order to achieve the common good. Then we have awareness. So it is hard to take action on a particular issue or problem if you are not even aware that it exists. Therefore, it is important for communities to be aware of the different issues that exist in their domain. So this is a key principle in community development because it allows communities to identify specific needs and resources that are needed for their development. Then you have trust and transparency. So there needs to be a certain level of trust and transparency for programs to work in any given community. This principle applies to the different stakeholders, such as those who will benefit from the programs, those who will get involved in the development process, and the leaders that will initiate them. So since the ideals, this is the question, so since the ideals of community development are to be initiated by the members of the community themselves, what may be the participation of government, particularly the local government unit concerned? So cite examples if you know of any. So city governments play a pivotal role in the revitalization of low-income communities and neighborhoods. Local development priorities, allocation of public funds to affordable housing, and other initiatives in community development are set and planned by local government units. So local government units have a critical role in handling these five functions that makes or breaks the success of community development efforts and initiatives. The first is the active response to the conditions of the market, the provision of support towards community development centers, the provisions of gap financing to projects headed by community development corporations or centers, the efficient transfer of land and structures controlled by the city, the efficient processing of funding allocations for the project and other permits for the development. So in general, government has a big role to play in the development of key infrastructure in the national and local levels. As a developing nation in Asia and a young democratic republic, the Philippines places its hopes for economic growth in its infrastructure development programs. But in order for the government to raise the requisite resources to fund these ventures, it must show an iron will to enact reforms to tackle corruption and political scenarios that damage the economy. So despite being the world's second fastest growing economy after China, the country has a high rate of poverty due to the income gap between the rich and the poor. Because of their understanding of financial management, the skilled class becomes wealthier as the economy progresses. As a native of this region, I've seen both sides of the infrastructure development coin. So those on the better side have better built homes and neighborhoods that also strive for sustainable growth, while those on the other sides build homes out of junkyard products such as wheels, rusted galvanized iron sheets, and coconut lumber. The upper class, which has benefited from economic development, has better housing, transportation, and social care, which is the polar opposite to what the poor have. So according to the Asian Development Bank, the Philippines' complete development into a first world country is hampered by the following factors. So the first is the compact fiscal circumstance because of revenue generation, which is weak, infrastructure, which is inadequate, uh, specifically on the electricity and transport areas, investor confidence, which is weak, and low due to problems in governance, instability in politics, and widespread corruption in the government, market failures which are not addressed, which leads to small industrial production. So an example of an initiative with the government for a particular community. Okay, so this is an example. So when I became part of the City Memorial Parks Development Board, which tackled the Bolonsari Cemetery in the city. So magnitudes of problems were identified, such as the community living on top of the niches, sanitation, security, and lack of space for new tombs. So to solve the problem, the city mayor called out the various representatives from different sectors, such as the academe, Catholic community, Muslim community, the Department of Health, City Health Office, City Engineer's Office, local government units, the barangays, and a representative from the City Council. So several consultative meetings were held to ensure the concerns of everybody will be heard and addressed. However, despite the meticulous investigation and analysis of the problems, there's still a problem in terms of budget and addressing the whole conundrum. So these were some of the conceptual designs class that I made back then. These were not approved, but I think I presented them. Okay. So this was my design for the columbary units, where the bones will be transferred to. So it's hexagonal in pattern, just like in nature. Okay. So this is just an example. So number 5, what may be the difference between community development concerns in the urban and rural areas? So, taking the context class that there's a big difference between urban and rural areas. When you see urban, means that the population is quite dense. Okay, so the situation is quite different. And then the rural areas, the population is quite dispersed. So the main difference between community development concerns in the urban and rural areas could be established by defining both terminologies. First, urban areas refer to towns, cities, suburbs, and areas with considerable density in population, while rural areas are the exact opposite. Rural areas have larger amounts of undeveloped land and low population density. Hence, in terms of context, both differ in variety of ways, therefore they may have concerns that considerably differ from one another. So according to Melo, the differences between the community development and concerns between urban and rural areas could be established by first examining their characteristics. So rural areas indicate the following. So first, the economy of rural areas are dependent on agriculture. Then, rural areas lack basic facilities such as electricity, water, transportation, waste disposal, and etc. So, okay, this is a wrong. Okay. Transportation. Okay. Waste disposal, etc. Employment for women are limited in rural areas, and much of the population are headed to cities to look for better opportunities. There's a lack of recreational health, social welfare, and educational services. There's a small amount of technical personnel, indigenous leaders, and financial resources, all of which are essential in community development projects. There's a need for a local organization that would coordinate and address the issues affecting rural communities. Then, urban areas indicate the following. First, there's a lack of identification in a community because a lot of the people are migrants from rural areas with no intention to settle in a permanent basis. There are inadequate facilities due to the large number of population. There are multiple agencies that lack proper coordination with each other. In communities which are adjacent to cities where families that are moved due to housing and disasters are located, people don't have a sense of identification with their community and with one another. Then, projects in community development in urban areas take the form of area redevelopment and slum clearance. However, there's always a possibility that people may not be interested in community development in both urban and rural areas. A multitude of factors could explain his behavior or attitude. The difference in urban and rural community development is important in establishing the correct strategies when implementing a certain project or undertaking. Okay? Then, considering the continuing changes taking place in the communities and technology, what may be the future of community development? So, according to Melo, community development have the greatest potential to influence social progress. The consideration of possibilities in the future may require further studies, but the following were identified as possibilities for community development in the context of tomorrow. The first is community development is expected to have a variety of forms in the advent of Industry 4.0, which have eliminated physical borders between nations through the internet. In the developing countries, okay, so community development should begin at the most disadvantaged areas. Then there's a movement for community development in a world context, which requires the mobilization of both public and private sectors. In the developing countries, the extent of state intervention will increase in terms of planned national development. So, with the identification of economic difficulties as the root of most community development problems, economic planning will be directed towards increasing the resources available for the general population. The next is community development will be geared to the following areas. So, namely, we have social welfare, housing, health, nutrition, economic status, education, and recreation. So, the technological changes brought about by Industry 4.0 may lead to Community 4.0, which focuses on social innovation to address problems in society. Community 4.0 could be achieved through experiential learning in communities and comprehensive trainings in technology, design thinking, and prototyping. This requires the partnership between schools, communities, private sector, and the government. So in the future, data science and big data analytics will play a big role in community development, especially the emergence of new technologies such as ubiquitous technologies. So the prime implication of ubiquitous technologies is that computing can be done anytime and anywhere. So compared to the use of desktop as a computing tool, ubiquitous computing can be used in any device, location, or in any available format. This could also mean that the technological barriers that existed before will be broken, thereby connecting everyone in a single network and making data easier to access. So this could make it easier for policymakers and communities to make decisions based on data from members in the community. Okay? So this is our lesson for this week, guys. If you have any further questions or clarifications, you may contact me anytime. I always try to respond as long as I'm online. Okay, so stay safe and see you next meeting.